Welcome back, fellow quiltaholics. Are you ready to start sewing on the last block of the Autumn Pines quilt? Today we're going to finish up the last paper piecing block, which is block D1 and D2 for the outer border on the Autumn Pines quilt. So grab your favorite beverage. Mine happens to be water with element in it. Grab your bag for D1 and D2 and let's get sewing. Okay, the first step in the D1 and D2 is to separate our strip sets. Strips 1 through 8 are going to go with your D1 block, and strips 9 through 15 are going to go with your D2 block. And if you remember when we made the arc strip sets with our 2.5-inch strips, we cut a little piece off and we glued it onto each section to make sure that we sewed the right fabrics underneath. Cut off a little 1/2-inch section so you can use the little fabric pieces. If you want to skip this step, that's your prerogative. Just make sure you keep your fabrics in order. We do need to cut these strips in half. This is the D2 unit. The D1 unit, you need to do 8 pieces, and the D2 unit, you need to do 12. So go ahead and cut your strips in half. They should be at least 21 inches each. You'll have to do this with both of your stacks. Here we are at the sewing machine, and I've got my strips placed here. I've got my unit pieces here. And in the pattern, it shows that for unit D1, we need to do 8 units, and for unit D2, we need to do 12 units. So with the strips cut in half, what I would suggest you do is just split those units between your 2 piles. So I've got 1 pile here. I have my second pile set aside. For unit D1, since there's 8 pieces, I'm going to go ahead and pull out 4 and do just 4 pieces for this first set, and I'll do 4 pieces for the next set. And then when you get to your unit D2 block, since you have to do 12 of those, we're going to do 6 pieces on one set of strips like this, and we'll do 6 units on the other. The pattern says to do 8 on one half and then do 4 on another. It's really tight trying to fit those 8 pieces in. So I would just stick with 6 and 6. So how we're going to start here is we're going to take fabric pieces 1 and 2, and we're going to put those right sides together. Now, if you have batiks, it really doesn't matter too much, obviously, but pick which side that you think is the right side. If you've got regular print cotton fabrics, then make sure you have it right side to right side. Fabric number 1 is on top and fabric number 2 is on the bottom. We also want to make sure that our sewing machine is set up for paper piecing. I've already got mine set up, but if you want to look at a video real quick on how to set up your sewing machine, I've got a link to that right here in the corner. You want to make sure you have a smaller stitch length, the right size needle, the right type of thread, all that good stuff to be successful. How we get started here is I've got my 2 strips. We want to make sure that these raw edges are lined up here because that's going to be our seam allowance edge. And then we're going to take our unit, and you're going to have the dotted line facing to your right because that's your 1/4 inch seam allowance right there. And we're going to place that dotted line right on the edge of the fabric, just like that. And then we're going to sew on line 1. These are very similar to doing the diamond wedding ring arcs. If you remember, we had to place those arcs on the strips just like this. On this particular piece, what's nice about it is we don't have to glue on that first piece. We don't have to do any trimming. All you have to do is place the paper down there, and you're probably going to want to leave a 1/4 inch or so in between the pieces. If we were trying to squeeze in more, like when you get to block D2 where you're putting 6 pieces on one fabric strip rather than 4 pieces, you might want to just on your first attempt, try to get them at least within a 1/4 inch of each other. Placing that dotted line right on the edges and sewing right down on line 1. As you can see, I have quite a bit of extra fabric here. So when we go to block D2, this is just half of a strip. You'll easily be able to place 5 and 6 on this strip and have plenty of room. Now let's take these over to the pressing board, and that will be our last step in the trim sew press process. We're going to go ahead and leave it all in one piece before we trim in between. So flip it over to the back, and you're going to press this strip on the bottom away from the top strip. So make sure you give it a little bit of a finger press before you iron it or press it, because we don't want to have any wrinkles in there. We want to make sure it's nice and flat. We'll take our iron and press. Okay, now we're going to go trim in between each of these pieces. I'm just going to cut in between here. I'll cut off some of this extra fabric. And then here you have some leftover scraps. In case you make a mistake, you'll have extra fabric. Now we're going to go into our process of the trim, sew, press, repeat, repeat, repeat. Let's grab our add a quarter ruler, and we're going to trim on line 2, just like we've done on all of our other blocks. Just going to fold that paper over, slide in your add a quarter ruler. So I'll do that to these 4 pieces, and then I'll show you how to add that third piece. And rather than have you sit here and watch me do this for the whole video, try to make the video short and sweet, and we'll get sewing on the rest of the pieces. We're back at the sewing machine here, and I've got my pieces all trimmed, and we're ready to start fabric 3. And we're going to just continue the same process as we did with those diamond arcs. And if you are just coming to this video and haven't seen other videos on the blocks of the Autumn Pines quilt, put a link up here to that video on doing the diamond wedding ring arcs. And you're going to match up the edge of where you just trimmed off with the add a quarter ruler, and then we're going to sew on line 2. Bring that up to the edge, match up those fabric edges, flip our paper over, and continue sewing on line 2. Leave about a quarter to half inch in between these pieces to make it easier so you're not all jammed in together. Last piece here. And that's it for the sewing part. Now we go over to the ironing board and we'll press again, and then we're just going to be repeating the same process with every strip. So we're going to go press it, then we're going to bring it back, trim it in between each of those. Then we're going to use the add a quarter ruler to trim on line 3, place the next fabric strip, and on until you get all the way to the end. So it's a pretty easy process. It's the same for unit D2. Once you have all those strips sewn on, we'll meet back at the cutting table and we'll be ready to trim those blocks. And then the next step is assembly. Here are the finished D2 blocks. And really the only thing left to do with these is to put a TRP line, which we did that in a previous video. You're just going to sew a basting stitch here and a basting stitch down below. That's so we can line your blocks up when we're assembling the quilt. And this is what the finished block should look like. And we'll be assembling the quilt in the next video. And if you want to watch a video on how to trim your blocks, I put a specific video on trimming your blocks. I'll put a link to that just right up here in the corner. You're going to trim them on the very outside line, just using a rotary cutter and a ruler. If you have a curved ruler, then that can help with the corners. That's how you sew your paper piecing blocks of unit D1 and unit D2. We'll meet you in the next video for assembling the quilt. All right, my quiltaholics, thanks so much for watching my video today. If you like this type of content and you like this video, you're following along with the Autumn Pines series, please consider subscribing, hit that like button, and share this with your friends. And also, make a comment down below and let me know what quilt you're working on. If you are following along with the Autumn Pines quilt, tell me how it's going. If you're doing another Quiltworx quilt, let me know if you have any problems, and maybe I'll make a video to help you out. So thanks again for watching. We'll see you in the next video for the assembly of the Autumn Pines quilt. If you're following along with the Autumn Pines quilt, you can find the next video here. If you just found this video and you want to see the whole series of the Autumn Pines quilt, here's a link to the playlist right here.